I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 10, where we're going to talk about the fear of death, lack of fear of death, fear of dying, and other super uplifting topics. I also, just to start off, we don't have a new coffee brand. It is the Chameleon Coffee from the last two episodes, and I apologize for that.
I don't know if people were they have high expectations.
I figure that's probably the highlight of the podcast in some ways.
Yeah, so if it's the highlight of the podcast hearing about the coffee, we definitely apologize for having the same old boring chameleon, whatever this is.
I mean, it wasn't super. I mean, it was tasty.
Yeah, it's good.
So, I guess we can talk about the fear of death.
We got into it a little bit
Two episodes ago.
And I just thought it was an interesting enough topic that it was worth teasing out.
I think also, we've done a lot of theology, religion, but we also promise on the podcast we're going to talk about life and philosophy and other things. So take a little bit of break again from harping on Calvinism.
Harping on Calvinism or theodicy or problem of evil.
Yeah.
I mean, death is still sort of a heavy topic, but I don't know. Like, I guess I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm afraid of death, but I feel like I want you to talk about why you're not first.
I mean, it's kind of I think it's a hard question to say why you're not afraid of death. Like, it feels more natural for people to be afraid of death.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's why, in my opinion, that's why one of the reasons religions came into existence. The other reason, which we've talked about a few times, is like, people were like, oh no, it's not raining, our crops are going to fail. Or like, this really good thing happened after I shook a stick 3 times, so I might as well like continue to do that, and maybe I'll be able to hunt better. And over time that codifies, and you get religion. Especially more like less so monotheism, because like the God of monotheism is, I understand from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam isn't like a magic genie, and it's actually kind of stressed that there isn't a ritual that will make God make it rain or give you prosperity. I mean, prosperity teachers would say if you give 10%, God will rain down blessings on you. But for the most part, God isn't a genie, where I think, especially in ancient pagan traditions, and what you see in like the rainforest and some of these isolated tribes, is it is more of a magic. Like, you say the right thing, you do the right ritual, and you get to kill a turkey, where if you didn't do that, the turkey would escape. I think also the fear of death like really leads into religion, where people are like, what happens? Like, especially in more ancient times. Like today, most death happens in a hospital. We're pretty far removed from it. I think there is a growing trend toward more hospice care inside your house, like die peacefully. But even then, when you get to a certain point, they just keep up in the morphine until you pass. Like 100 years ago and before that, it was pretty common to just die in your bed, and to die without painkillers, to die, with cancer, like transforming your body, like literally watching tumors grow on people's faces and out of their bodies. And when you think back like 10,000 years, you were dying from tooth infection, incredibly painful death. You were dying from breaking a bone and having to poke through your skin and you're bleeding out. So like, there's like really gruesomeness there, and people are like, man, I don't want that to happen. And then what happens after that? So I think it sort of is natural to fear death. I used to be afraid. I think I was more, I don't want to say I was more afraid as a Christian, because being a Calvinist and believing I was predestined for heaven took some of that fear away. But it was definitely part of what led me into Christianity, besides the fact that I was pretty messed up when I joined the church that I joined, and they kind of offered hope and redemption, and I was looking for that. And as far as like not fearing death, like we talked about this, like I don't fear going to sleep.
Yeah.
Like my conscious brain isn't working while I'm asleep. So like I close my eyes, something happens 8 hours later, I wake up, or 5 hours, depending if Bash is having a rough night. And so like, there's not a thing there. Now, some kids are actually afraid of sleep because they're not sure, like, are they going to be conscious the next day?
Right.
Right? And, I mean, I think you could also make the argument, well, like, you're dreaming. And, you know, you have past experience that you're going to wake up. But there's no promise you're going to wake up again. Like, you could die in your sleep. I think it goes back to the last episode when I read why a physicist should speak at your funeral. Like, nothing is created or destroyed. Your energy and your matter go on. In fact, so neat fact, statistically, you are breathing in at this second an atom that Julius Caesar breathed out when he said "Et tu, Brute." Like, there's that many atoms inside a lung, and that few people in the world, that when you do the numbers, you have like a molecule of water or carbon dioxide or oxygen in your lungs right this second. That came out of Julius Caesar's lungs. So, like, in some ways, he's not dead. I mean, in other ways, he very much is. Like, he's not ruling Rome anymore or talking, but, you know, that if he's affected all of history, now, you know, he's more famous, but even people who you've never heard of have affected history. And we kind of talked about quantum mechanics last week. So there's this quantum entanglement and particles interacting with other particles that can't ever be undone. And, you know, an observer measures something, and an observer doesn't have to be a conscious being. It could be a photon hitting atom in such a way that it excites an electron that jumps to the next energy field. Like, that could be considered an observer. Or a particle detector that has no human consciousness whatsoever, but beeps every time a radioactive particle decays and hits it. So in some ways, like, even the most short, uninspired, miserable life has affected the universe in ways that can never be undone. And I think that gives me a little bit of hope. And, like, you know, and this is sort of cliche, but I already not existed. Right? Like, I was born January 5th, 1980. So go back 9 months from there. So, like, February 1979, I didn't exist. Now, even more so because, like, sperm are made all the time. Like eggs, you know, I think we all know, or some of you will be informed, that females contain all the eggs that they're going to have for life. Like, they're made before a woman is born. But males, like, they continually make new sperm. So at least half of me didn't exist before February of 1979. I wasn't afraid of not existing then. So I'm just going back to the state I started in.
But you didn't have any experience of existing.
It's
different.
true.
It's a different kind of non-existing.
In some ways,
In some
yes.
ways. But non-existing is non-existing.
Yeah, it's still fungible.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that there's sort of a comforting thought, and I don't disagree in believing that we go on, albeit in a different form. And I think that's the point for me is that once I die, I can't imagine that I can't come to believe that I will ever be everything that I am now. Like, I won't be conscious of being Matt.
Yeah, sure.
Ever again.
So,
Yeah, so that's the issue. That's what death. That's what death really is.
So are you familiar with Theseus's ship?
Mm-mm.
All right.
No.
So it's a ancient Greek. I don't want to say paradox, like conundrum. So, you know, Theseus had a ship, right? And it's brought to the harbor at Athens, and it's saved to commemorate how amazing he is. But one day, one of the boards starts to rot. So they take that board out, and they put a new board in. Is it still Theseus's ship?
Yes, I've heard of this.
Right?
Now that you mention it.
So it is still, right? Now, the next day, a second board has to be replaced. Is it still Theseus' ship? Most people say yeah. Eventually, though, every single plank, every single nail, every single sail, every single piece of that ship, if we're going to keep it, right, because water corrodes in salt water, every single piece will have been replaced. Is it still Theseus' ship? If replacing one board, it still is, and two boards, it still is, and three boards, it still is, and a new sail, it still is. But when I say every single thing is replaced, that's just a replica. So at some point, it's not Theseus' ship.
Yeah.
And I don't know what percent that is. And I think this partly like why it's a conundrum. Like, it almost shouldn't be Theseus' ship after the first board is replaced, but he was probably replacing boards while he was sailing, still his ship. All the atoms in your body, every single one, have been replaced. Is your close to 40?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Multiple times.
Yep.
Right? Like right now, you're losing atoms and you're gaining other atoms as you breathe, as you digest. So if you're continually being replaced with atoms that are in different states, that are connected to different other atoms in your body, and none of the atoms that you were born with, or actually some of them probably are because it's been recycled, but they're in different spots or they're in different energy states. At some point, you're not you anymore, but you still are.
I've never not been conscious of my own relationships to objects and people. You know, my physical makeup is different, obviously. I don't even need to be I don't even need to know anything about atoms to see that I'm constantly transforming, just aging. You might not, you show somebody a picture of yourself from 10 years old, you might say, I kind of recognize that, right?
Right.
So I don't know, like, none of this is making me less worried.
So I guess my point is, like, you look at a picture of you from 10 years old, and you're like, yeah, that's not who I am today, but it was still me. But it wasn't. Like,
Yeah.
Because I think most of us think, oh, I was smaller then, and I have these cells, and I'm just adding more to it. So, like, I'm adding to myself. But the fact is, like, everything's been replaced.
So right now I'm aware of the fact that when I'm 75, I won't look like this. I won't think about the world like this.
Yeah.
I won't. Hopefully, I'll be a better person. Maybe I'll be worse. Maybe I'll have Alzheimer's, which is a kind of death in a way. And so I could choose to be anxious about death, not just that physical death we always talk about, when I have a funeral, but like I could choose to be anxious every single second because anything could dramatically change my life as I know it.
Yeah.
Any second. I could, on the way home, God forbid, get in a car accident and become a paraplegic.
Yeah. And in some ways, yes, I agree to your statement, but I also want to say, like, everything's always changing you. So
that's what I'm saying. I'm just riffing off of what you're saying. Yeah. I'm realizing in real time that, like, you could conceive of every newness as a death.
Yeah.
Right. You could conceive of it that way, which is like, but you couldn't actually live in that conception. You'd be like,
Yeah, you'd probably go insane.
You just go insane. Right. Exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
Okay, so the person that just said that's not the person that just said this.
Yes.
So that person's dead, and I'm still not afraid, so maybe I shouldn't be afraid. It's like, who can live like this? Just drink your coffee and, like...
But I'd say that's where I all of a sudden lose my fear of death. Like, if everything is a little death, and if my atoms are being replaced, and at some point in time, all my atoms won't be in this physical body, but they'll still be around, what's the difference between them being all over the universe and them being assembled other than their position in space-time?
Yeah. Yeah. I've never actually I shouldn't say that. That's not true. But this is a really interesting thought experiment that I don't know if I've ever engaged with quite to this depth or this level, in which maybe it is rather comforting to go there, and maybe I'll employ this tonight when I'm those few minutes when I'm not distracted by my phone or something that I'm watching on TV, and I'm like, oh, I have an expiration date as Matt Miller, and I think to myself, yeah, but the Matt that went to high school had an expiration date too, and you made it through that, and so I don't know. It's I guess for me, it's not really the fear of hell. It's just the idea of non-existence is terrifying to me. And clearly, like, being a Christian doesn't alleviate that all that much for me at least.
Yeah.
But I had this dream I remember I had this nightmare when I was a kid. I don't know how old I was, maybe 12 or 13. I'm sitting on this couch. It's kind of like have you ever watched the show Ozark?
Yeah,
that's
kind of
like
Ozark. We didn't get to the latest season yet.
Okay, but. So I won't spoil anything, but it's kind of got that aesthetic in my dream. It's kind of bluish and dim and gray, and
you were dealing heroin in the swamps of.
It's not quite that specific, but that's just kind of the aesthetic. So I'm sitting on this couch in this house by myself, maybe sort of abandoned because there's wallpaper that's missing in certain parts of the house, and the door to I can't remember if it's to the basement or to the upstairs, but there's a door open, and out crawls this this man in like a hoodie, but there's no face, and so there's no face, and he just like slowly reaches out his hand and points at me and says, "You no longer exist." And then I wake up. It's the most terrifying dream I've ever had. The idea of not existing is terrifying. I think it's also the biggest blow to my ego. And having thought about it, I think that's largely what it's about for me. Is like it seems a grave injustice to be allowed to live, but then only for a time. And then why?
Yeah.
For what? To what end and to what purpose? And animals, I don't think they think about purpose. Maybe some of the, I don't know, you would know more about like, the apes and stuff. But like, it's just like, so I take up space, I breathe out carbon dioxide, I have emotions, and where do they go? I guess I could take some comfort in the fact that they do go somewhere, that everything we do affects the universe, but even that's worrisome in some ways because not everything we do is good. Some of the stuff that we do that we mean for good is misunderstood, and I think about that as somebody who writes on social media that I could delete, but like I might die before it gets deleted. So who knows what kind of impact it's going to have on the universe in 20 or 30 years? Maybe I'll be considered like a brilliant philosopher in 200 years, or worse, nobody will care at all.
I mean, probably no one will care.
That's the most likely scenario.
Yeah. As a side note, Shirley thinks you're way too harsh on yourself on social media when you like apologize for posts that you put up. She's like, he doesn't need to do that.
Okay. Tell Shirley I'm sorry for being so apologetic. But
yeah, I guess I don't have. I mean, in some ways, I have the desire to live on. Like, I want to leave a legacy of my kids and my grandkids, and but I think I don't know if I need to be remembered in 1,000 years.
It's not that I need to be remembered in 1,000 years as much as it is, it seems to need some point. It needs to have some purpose. Whatever it was, the 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years, which in light of eternity is really nothing.
Right.
But
why?
Why? I don't know. Maybe we could get a guest who's a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Sure. But I guess, I mean, like, why do you? Like, why does it have to have meaning or purpose? Why can't it just be?
That's a good question. And I think that's what I'm trying to express is fundamental to my identity. It's like presuppositional.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel that. It makes me so depressed to think that it might be meaningless.
Yeah, I see. I would even make a distinction between meaningless and mattering. Like, just because it in the end it doesn't matter doesn't mean it's meaningless. I also just want to say I think your thought process is very Western.
Okay.
Right? Like, the point in Hinduism is to stop existing. Right? Like, you continually get reincarnated until you can join nirvana. And it's not like an afterlife where there's this paradise that's nirvana. Like, you literally become one with nirvana.
Is that Hinduism or is that Buddhism?
I mean, they borrow so much from each other. I believe it's more Hindu.
Yeah. I still think that, well, maybe the Western human is way too self-conscious. That could be the case. But if that's true, then I just happen to be trapped in that. I think that Nirvana sounds great, but I don't get to experience Nirvana as Matt Miller, born in Worcester, Ohio in 1982.
Right.
It's still death.
Yeah.
And I suppose the hope in the Christian story is the hope of resurrection, where I will be resurrected as conscious self that was born in Worcester, Ohio in 1982, albeit with a perfect body that can't decay or break down, which, according to our definition, is still a kind of death in a way.
Sure.
Because
and I would my pushback would be, which set of atoms is God going to use to give you the resurrected body?
I don't know. I'll ask him.
But I mean, if you're constantly changing and you're not the same at 10 and at 20 and at 30, at 40, at 75, at 120, like, which one? Which set of atoms, which state of consciousness? And maybe it's something completely other, like,
Right. And if it's completely other, then we're at the same place where we are with Hinduism and Buddhism.
Right. And I would even push back further as a naturalist to say, okay, so you have this new body, brand new atoms, maybe the same consciousness, which I think makes you a dualist and me not. Like, the laws of physics must be different then. Because like, stuff decays.
Yeah, when the Bible says new creation, I take that very literally.
So, but if the laws of physics are so different,
I
and
know where you're going.
Do you?
Yeah.
What?
Go ahead.
Well, no. I want to hear your prediction first.
If the laws of physics are completely different, and my atoms are not the same atoms, or they are. But if they are, how could they be? And if they're not, then isn't that death anyway?
No, I was
Okay.
I was going more like, so particles decay because of the weak force, right? Particles are attracted to each other via the electromagnetic force and gravity and the strong force in different ways. So if particles stop decaying, like if uranium stops moving towards lead, then the weak force is so completely different that we have like it's probably as unconceivable as not existing is, right? Like there's no words for it. So I have like two tangents here. One, Christian apologists tend to use the fine tuning of the universe to say there's a God, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, here's certain parameters, like if the strength of gravity was different by 1/1,000,000th and this and that. And we can get, I think a later episode is like the difference between the weak anthropic principle and the strong anthropic principle and why, Christians who are using these fine tuning arguments are just wrong. But it's an argument they use. And now we're saying in the new heavens and the new earth, particles don't decay. Mm-hmm. So like the fine tuning argument kind of goes out the window because now you have a different universe with different parameters for the weak force so that things don't decay. All of a sudden, so then it can't be fine tuned. And I want to go back to Genesis and say, so before death, before sin entered the world, were the laws of physics like the new creation, or were they like what they are now? Because if they are what they are now, then eventually, like all atoms will decay, protons will eventually decay. And so if you have this idea that the fall never happened, and so everyone would have lived forever, that's physically impossible based on the laws of physics, because everything...
Unless the fall...
radically changed the laws of physics.
Yeah,
and
right.
Again, then you can't use the fine-tuning argument.
Right.
Because that's not how God created it.
Right.
So, like, that's problematic for me.
In terms of belief, in terms of being a Christian, in terms of...
Yeah, in terms of all of it. In terms of, like, worldview as a whole, where it would be one place where I point and say, like, Christianity can't be true because... And it's not like the nail in the coffin, because I think the way we come to believe a worldview is true or false is... Or the way a logical person would. So, like, the perfect person in an economic view should look at all the evidence and all the arguments and weigh each one and say, is it more probable A or more probable B? And in some cases, B is going to be more probable, and in some cases, A is going to be more probable, but eventually, one of them is going to win out. And so I would say that the idea that the laws of physics have to change both pre-fall, or you have like ultimate death to where protons decay and there's like literally nothing in existence, or in the resurrection that the laws of physics are so different that it's completely unimaginable, are both, to me, evidence against deism.
Yeah, well,
I know we said we weren't going to talk about...
I don't. It's interesting that we're talking about evidence against theism versus things that are unimaginable.
Sure.
Like, because all I hear is, what I always hear whenever anybody brings up the topic of God is, again, I think I've said this before in the podcast, do we even know what we're talking about? When we're talking about God, we're in the realm of things that are beyond our imagination. Mm-hmm. We're already there. We're already in tautologies. Like to talk about God is already like circular. It's a conversation that is whimsically hypothetical from my point of view. You could say we're in the realm of faith when we're talking about God. I will never purport on this podcast to try to explain how a concept of God or how theism gels with the physical world as we know it.
I wouldn't say never, because for like the 10 people who actually listen regularly.
I just think that as it pertains to the fear of death and not existing, and my conscious understanding as an individual, that the hope that Christianity, true or false, whether Christianity is true or false, the hope that it offers of being a conscious self again, albeit in potentially a physical universe that I don't even understand, regardless of whether that is incompatible with physics, which I think obviously it is. It also occurs to me as we're talking that I couldn't argue that a new Matt is the same Matt that I know now. I that's what occurs to me, is that I still couldn't argue that even in the resurrection that I don't even understand that consciousness. So I come back. You always come back to the same place. Matt, as I know him from birth and as I understand him, will one day cease to be, regardless of what the myth, legend, narrative, explanation, philosophy is. Whether it's nirvana, whether it's naturalism, whether it's Christianity.
Yeah. I actually got to this. I was going to mention it before you did. So then, why be afraid? If is where...
Because some things just are. Because some things are not logical. They're pathos. They're not logos. They're just fear. Maybe all fear is irrational.
I don't know. Like,
so I mean, some fear is.
I guess irrational in the sense that we're not sitting around logically being like, there are these things called snakes and they have fangs and have poison.
Right.
And people are just like, snake.
Right.
Most people. Some people are like, cool, snake.
I mean, there are healthy fears, obviously.
Right.
Fears that help us survive.
Yeah.
But then for what? Like survive for what? If we're gonna die, that's what I'm talking about with meaning. It's like survive to what end? Why? Because I want to live as long to make as positive of an impact, but I don't know. Like I might do something really terrible. Yeah. So maybe I should die today and just protect the world from the hypothetical terrible thing I'm going to do 10 years from now.
Like I would say the drive to survive doesn't even necessarily start in consciousness, right? Like Dawkins in The Selfish Gene. Is it The Selfish Gene? I might have the book wrong, but one of Dawkins' basic premises, like your genes want to reproduce themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And the whole point of life, it's not to make yourself happy or raise kids. It's just so that these genes make more of themselves. Mm-hmm. That's it. And that's what life was in the primordial ooze. And every step along evolution is just these genes trying to get the upper hand over other genes so that they can make more genes. Like that, I will grant, seems a little hopeless because you want to be like, well,
yeah.
But that also potentially is like the nature of reality. So the only reason you want to survive is your genes over billions of years have got to the point where they created consciousness so that you would be afraid of death, so that they will make more of themselves.
Yeah. And I don't know if that makes me feel hopeless or depressed, but it definitely makes me feel small. That is emasculating.
Right. Because, and even more so, like on some level, like it's like, it doesn't matter, right? Like you're being controlled by genes.
Right. That's what you're saying. That's what you're
like
saying.
The smallest unit that could potentially divide and replicate itself is the only thing driving all of what you do. And we're probably, if we're giving you an existential crisis right now, I apologize.
I think existential crises are good for us to depending on how we choose to handle them. It's a different topic, but I think the ways that we handle them, for the most part, not for the most part, I think you can explain a lot of things socially and politically. I'm just throwing this out there. Hypothesis, it's probably BS. I think you can explain a lot of things socially, politically, socioeconomically, by the fact that people have existential crisis. I think if people aren't thinking about why and what for and, oh my God, I'm going to die. If people aren't thinking about these things, then they probably just, Rousseau's state of nature, right? They probably just run around feeding themselves, and it's basically animals. Just survive as long as you can, and that's it. But the fact that there's this weight of meaning, it's an interesting question where it comes from. We explored that earlier in this episode, like where does that weight of meaning come from? But the fact that that exists, I think that's what propels good art, good and civilization, all the good and the bad that comes with it, which only creates more existential crises, which is like maybe the meaning, and yet there we are. And I don't know. I go back to the hope that Christianity provides, actually, the more I think about it, especially after our conversation in this episode, it is really more for this life than anything else. Is that my actions have eternal weight to them, and yet I could say that as an atheist too.
Yeah.
So I need to think about that, and I do think about that. It's not the first time I've ever thought about that,
right?
But
yeah,
I feel like we're running low on time, and I don't have time to formulate a real response to that. And then even then, I'll come up with this like really eloquent and like sentimental and like inspiring thing, and you'll still say, "Yeah, but."
I mean, that's what we do. Yeah, and I mean, I think in two senses, you're right that Christianity's hope is for this world. One, that like your actions have eternal consequences, and two, like if there is a new heavens and a new earth, you don't need hope anymore, right? Like you're there, so like there's no hope of like,
yeah,
I really wish that I.
That's an interesting thought, right? Yeah,
you're like, because like one of your fears is like not existing. And so the hope of Christianity is like, no, like there'll be a new heavens and a new earth and you'll exist. And like, you don't need to hope if like God's right there and he's like, you're going to exist now.
But there's going to be a future version of Matt that doesn't have any angst or existential despair. I don't even know that person.
Right.
So I'm dead anyway.
Is that the podcast name, the episode name?
I'm dead anyway. Yes, I love it.
So we did say we're going to talk about the fear of dying. So I'm not afraid of death. Because I think like non-existence is like, it's complicated. I think I've explained some of it, but also like if I'm not existence and there's no more consciousness, like I'm not going to be there to experience it. I am afraid of dying because I'm pretty pain averse. Mm-hmm. And even people who are in hospice given morphine and the dosage is upped and upped and upped, like it doesn't seem like it's a comfortable thing.
Yeah.
I've always joked that I want to go out at like 50 to 55 by being hit by a bus that I don't see coming.
Yeah.
Because that seems pretty instantaneous. And it seems like even if I'm experiencing pain, it's for such a short blip, and then I don't exist. That it like where like thinking about slowly deteriorating because of a cancer that's inoperable and doesn't respond to treatment, and like all you have to do is wait until cancer takes over your body. Like that thought, like that's what makes me like my stomach churn and get me, a little lightheaded.
Yeah. Because I'm afraid of that too.
I don't think anyone's not afraid of that. I think there are some people like me who aren't afraid of dying, but I think
that's funny that I just said, I guess I'm afraid of that too. I guess I'm afraid of losing limbs and having tumors.
Right.
I guess.
Of being slowly tortured.
Yeah. Did we say this was going to be a light episode?
I think so.
Yeah, that's a lie.
We also said we weren't going to talk about theology. So. Next episode will be lighter, I think. Although
maybe
we have the ability to take light things pretty.
The other thing I was going to say, what's interesting though is I once had. It's funny because I wasn't even close to dying, but I once had what, at the time I thought I could die. It was a kidney stone. Now, if you've ever had a kidney stone, the first time you have one, it's like, what's going on my insides? Because it's the most painful thing.
Yeah, I have not.
Like, it's just the most painful thing.
Yeah.
So I thought it could be a kidney stone, but I also thought it could just be my liver failed. It was on the left side, so I knew it wasn't my appendix.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, I was on the way to the hospital and thinking, this is the highest percentage. This is the closest I've ever been to death. Like, staring it like in the face as a real existential possibility. I could die on this day in this car or in this hospital that I'm about to go to the point that Rachel, who was driving me there, I'm actually like slumped over in the car, like writhing in agony, and I just kind of turn to the side and say, I love you, because I thought that was my last chance, which I realize now was not a thing to do to a woman driving her significant other to the hospital, and she doesn't know what's going on with them either. She told me later, she's like, I thought you were going to die. You just turned over to me all of a sudden. Like, you've been like writhing in agony for 20 minutes, and now you're just like, I love you, like in this real soft voice. I was like, I thought I was going to die. And what I can say, and this brings me comfort to this day when I think about it, this is the thing I actually use when I'm having these existential crises at night, thinking about my non-existence. I think about the one time in my life I was in a position where I wasn't actually going to die, but I thought I was, and I wasn't afraid. In the moment, when I was there,
yes,
I wasn't afraid.
And I think that from what I have not firsthand necessarily experienced, but read, and what, like, most people at the time that they're about to die are like, oh, okay, this is the thing. Yeah, I guess it's fine.
And so I just imagine when I come there again, or maybe I'll get hit by a bus and I'll never, but
or if you're a premillennial, Jesus will come back and you don't even have to go.
I'm not a premillennialist.
Doesn't mean that they're wrong. Right? I'm not a Christian, but there's a lot of people who are like.
That's funny. But just stated, I'm not a premillennialist. But yeah, if I come to that place again where I'm in hospice or something, I imagine that I'll feel pretty similarly to when I had a kidney stone. Or if I'm old, I might even be ready. Like if I'm in my 90s, I might be like,
yeah, you know, get this over.
I want this.
And I think there are people who are still terrified up to the moment they die. You know, like fighting against it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and just so both of us have this fear of dying and adversity to pain, or not adversity. But we don't want pain. And I would say that actually goes back to Dawkins' selfish gene, where if you have pain, then you're not going to be reproducing your genes. So the genes are like, no, we're gonna make it. Or the organisms that had genes that became averse to pain were the ones that continued to go on. Because the ones who were like, pain's fine, I don't care, like they got eaten.
Yeah. 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 I think those were the Jordashes, right? I made a dad joke. Genes Never mind. You can erase that part.
from the 90s.
Yeah. Remember weren't they the Walmart brand?
I know.
Like
I think
DoorDash?
weren't they expensive at one point, and then they became.
If they were expensive, that was the 80s. Because in the 90s, they were like...
Yeah, I think there was like a hot minute where they were like the thing.
Yeah.
And then, yes, became the
Right.
knockoff. Like,
Yeah, they became non-adverse to pain.
fair enough.
That's what I'm saying. I just made a dad joke. That's all. I'm 40. I'm allowed.
You're a dad. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't. It does. Your age doesn't matter. Once you have kids, you're allowed to make dad jokes.
Yeah.
My daughter groans. I send her memes quite a bit.
Isn't it great? When I was in my 20s, well, before I was a dad, I was like, man, I don't want to be this guy.
Yeah.
And then when I became a dad, I was like, I totally love being this guy.
Yeah. I mean, part of the way I wooed Shirley was dad jokes.
Yeah?
Yeah, and I was like looking up. So we met online at Match.com.
Uh-huh.
And I was on a few dating sites. Like I did the Bumble and the Tinder. And the Tinder, I was like, this isn't for me. And then Bumble, I like met some people, but it didn't really go anywhere because it's like Tinder for people who don't want to just have random sex, but like
Yeah.
want an ego boost. And if you've used Bumble and you've found relationships that great, what I found was it was for like friendly dates, but didn't really lead anywhere. And then Match, it turns out like when you pay for the dating sites, they're the most successful. It ends up being the most successful because people are like, I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is to find a partner. So I'm like looking up like, how do you meet people? And it turns out like messaging someone hi or showing them pictures of your genitals are not the best ways to start conversations with ladies. Though one of the advice was like, be funny. So I started looking up all these ridiculous jokes. And after me and Shirley became exclusive, I still had like this wealth of jokes. And I was like, these need to be told.
This whole thing implies that you didn't have a sense of humor until you were trying to...
I had a
find a girl.
I didn't have like one-liner jokes that you could text to someone.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, what's a vegan zombie eat? Grains. Right?
I love imagining you doing that to somebody that you didn't know from Adam as like the way...
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nate. What does a vegan zombie eat?
So...
And then the person on the other end, let's get married.
So, real quick, my opening line for almost everybody on Match was like, hey, I've met a lot of people on here, and I don't want to waste your time or my time. Can we both agree that yellow starburst are the worst? And that was usually like enough for people to be like, what the heck is this guy talking? And there were some who were like, I don't understand what you're talking. And I was like, all right, if you're not getting that's like humor and a whimsical way for me to... I was like, we're not going to work. Yeah, we're not going to work. And the ones who engaged, I was like, all right. Like, and then we would move into more real conversation with some dad jokes in there. So hot tip on how to make your jeans move forward. I just gave you like 3 jokes.
How to be Wrangler. I don't know.
Z Cavaricci?
There you go. There you
that
go.
doesn't exist anymore either.
Okay. I don't know.
Banana Republic.
How to be Banana Republic.
Also could be the title of
Also.
this episode.
And not Jordache.
We did say we were going to talk about uplifting things. I think we ended on some uplifting notes.
This is the funniest we've ever been.
Anyway. Anything else?
Coffee's still good. And appreciate the continued use of your space.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming down every week. I mean, I know the space is more conducive. Well, the summer's going to be funny because right now, like, I have no kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have kids, but not in the house.
Yeah, so maybe we should think about stocking up on...
Yeah, I mean, I can also kick them out, and, you know, the older 2 are teenagers, so they'll just be in their room texting their friends, and I have other spaces, just not quite as nice as the kitchen table. Although it's getting... If you look on the far end, Bash is really taken to jamming forks into
Oh,
the
yeah.
table. Do you see all the marks? Yeah. This was a really expensive table. I got it off Craigslist for a steal, but this is like solid wood, crate and barrel, probably $1,000, and he's pretty much destroyed it. So, also a type of death that I was not afraid of until it happened, and then had to radically accept that someday we're gonna have to like sand down this table and refinish it, and it's a big project.
Yeah. And also, I want to mention that we're thinking about having guests soon.
Yeah.
We haven't asked anybody in particular, but we have names.
I asked a few people.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I haven't reached out to anybody individually, but I know that you and I have talked about.
Yeah.
We've thrown out
Yeah,
names.
those are the people who I reached out to.
Yeah.
But if you're interested, you don't have to be in Belchertown, Massachusetts. There are ways to do this via the internet, and shoot us an email or a text or a Facebook message or an Instagram or Twitter. Although we don't really use Twitter. I set it up and it's like meh.
I felt like that about Twitter from day one.
Yeah, so Twitter's dead to you in the same way that you'll be dead to the rest of us.
Twitter's genes are useless to me.
Yeah. A lot of people like it.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. Like, rate, share. Really appreciate if you enjoy this podcast, sharing it with one other person. Any parting words?
I love you guys.
All right. Have a great week.